problem with AI email drafting is not that it writes badly. The problem is that it writes like someone who is trying very hard to sound appropriate. That is how you get three polished paragraphs that say almost nothing, a greeting that feels like legal review approved it, and a closing line no normal person would ever type. Then you spend more time fixing the email than writing it yourself, which defeats the whole point. Most robotic AI emails come from vague prompts. If you ask for a professional email, you will get a generic professional email. That is exactly what you asked for. The model fills the gaps with corporate filler because you did not give it a voice, a goal, or a container. So the fix is not mystical. You need better inputs and tighter guardrails. The three inputs that matter most are context, outcome, and tone anchor. Context means what happened and what the other person actually needs to know. Outcome means the one thing you want from this email by the end of the thread. Tone anchor means a short example of how you sound when you are clear, calm, and human. Once you feed those three inputs in, the draft quality jumps fast. This matters because email drafting is not a one-time task, it repeats. That means the cost of a weak workflow keeps showing up again and again. You lose 10 minutes here, 15 there, and another 20 because the first draft came back in the wrong shape. That is exactly where AI should earn its keep, not as a novelty machine, as a friction reducer. If a system can take a sensitive reply, two follow-ups, and a half-written update and turn them into short, direct drafts that still sound like you, then it is worth keeping. If it cannot do that on a normal Tuesday, then it is probably just a demo-friendly trick. One thing that helps immediately is collecting better raw material before you prompt. People often ask AI to rescue work that was never defined clearly in the first place. Better inputs do not need to be elegant, they just need to be real. Use your rough notes, actual constraints, ugly examples, deadlines, names, goals, and the pieces you are usually tempted to leave out. Real context gives the model something to grip, vague requests force it to guess. And when the setup is based on guessing, the output usually needs too much cleanup to feel like a real time saver. I also think the order of operations matters more than the exact wording. For email drafting, the best sequence is usually to get the mess visible, compress it into structure, turn that structure into one usable draft, and only then polish. People often reverse that. They chase a polished version before they have a useful version. That slows everything down. A rough draft is not a failure. It is the bridge between confusion and refinement. AI is strongest when it helps you cross that bridge fast. Here's a practical example. Say you need to tell a client the deadline is moving. That's not difficult because grammar is hard. It is difficult because the tone has to land right. Too soft and the message sounds vague. Too hard and it feels cold. If all you ask AI for is a professional update email, it will usually give you something long, careful, and forgettable. But if you tell it the context, the exact outcome, and the emotional job of the message, the draft changes. Calm but firm, clear about the date, specific about the next step, human enough that the reader does not feel handled. Once the emotional job is named, the model has something real to work with. That is why I force a container. The container matters almost as much as the content. One short paragraph, three tight paragraphs, 5 bullets, a reply under 100 words. If you leave the structure open, the model will wander. A lot of people focus only on what to say. I care just as much about where it should stop. If the reply should be short, say short. If the email needs one next step, say one next step. Do not leave the structure open and then act surprised when the draft gets bloated. My favorite workflow is ugly draft first, cleanup pass second. The first pass asks AI to produce a fast version with the right context and tone. The second pass is where the real leverage shows up. I ask it to remove filler openings, short and long sentences, kill hedging, and replace vague language with concrete next actions. That second pass is usually worth more than the first one because it strips the robotic polish off the draft. The same logic works for follow ups, and follow ups are where this saves a stupid amount of time. Most follow up emails are not conceptually hard, they are emotionally annoying. You do not want to sound passive, you do not want to sound needy, you do not want to sound like you copied a template from the internet. So, the best move is to save a few follow up patterns that already sound like you, then use AI to adapt them to the actual situation. That way, you're not starting from zero every time, and you are not asking the model to invent your tone from scratch. Another common use is pushback. Maybe someone suggested a bad idea, asked for extra scope, or made a request that needs a boundary. Those are the moments where people either over explain or become too blunt. I helps when you tell it the emotional job of the email before you ask for wording, friendly but direct, calm without sounding weak, clear without creating drama. Once that job is named, the draft gets much closer to something usable. There are a few mistakes to kill immediately. Stop asking for 5 versions unless you actually need 5 versions. Extra versions usually create indecision, not clarity. Stop pasting huge thread histories when only 2 lines matter. Noise creates mush. And stop sending raw drafts without reading them out loud. The human check still matters. You can usually hear the fake line before you can see it. That last part matters more than people admit. The goal is not to let AI replace your judgment. The goal is to let it remove the slowest part of email. Starting and shaping, you still own the message. You still decide how hard or soft to push. You still decide what should not be said. But instead of staring at a cursor, you get a real draft in seconds and spend your energy on refinement. That is the right role for AI in email. Fast start, tight structure, human finish. I would also save more than prompts. Save output shapes. Save the version of the email that was easiest to use. Maybe that is a short update, a soft follow-up, a firm boundary reply, or a quick scheduling email. Prompts matter, but structures matter just as much because they reduce cleanup next time. A lot of people save words and forget shape. Then they wonder why the next session still feels like work. Structure is what makes repetition easier. The last thing I watch is whether the system makes me calmer or just busier. Good AIUs should reduce friction, reduce ambiguity, and reduce cleanup. It should not create extra tabs, extra versions, and extra thinking I now have to manage. When email drafting is working, I feel more decisive because the next move is clearer. That is how I know the workflow is doing its job. It is not just producing text, it is producing momentum. So if you want the simplest version you can use today, do this. Give AI the context, the outcome, and one tone anchor. Tell it the emotional job of the email, force a container, get the ugly draft, run one cleanup pass, read it out loud, send it, do that consistently, and I stopped sounding like a generic office intern because you stopped asking it to be one. If I were tightening this further, I would keep a tiny diagnostic checklist for the misses. Was the context too weak? Was the ask too broad? Was the tone anchor fake? Did I skip the container? Did I send the first pass instead of the cleanup pass? That kind of diagnosis matters because bad results often come from sloppy setup, not from some mysterious failure of AI itself. Once you can diagnose the miss, the workflow improves fast because you stop treating every weak result like a full restart. Another useful move is building tiny email lanes, one lane for follow-ups, one for sensitive replies, one for scheduling, one for updates, one for pushback. The wording will change, but the emotional job usually repeats. If you save those lanes, the next draft starts much closer to done. You are no longer asking the model to invent a tone and a structure every single time. I also think people underestimate the value of frictionless escalation. Sometimes the first draft is too soft, and sometimes it is too hard. AI is very good at controlled revision. The revision target is specific. Make this firmer without sounding hostile, shorten this by a third, keep the first paragraph, but make the ask cleaner. That is far more useful than asking for several unrelated versions and then getting stuck choosing. The real point is this: email is not hard because words are hard. Email is hard because relationships, timing, and tone live inside the words. I becomes useful when it helps you shape those pressures without flattening your personality. When it does that consistently, email stops being a daily drag and becomes one more loop you can run cleanly.